Hey, Smoky Hill Vineyard, Jay Pathak here, and we are finishing our series in the book of Daniel. And this has been so fun for me to be a part of this with you and just exploring this faithful man in the midst of an incredibly politically complex time. And I think we've seen as we've looked through this book has a lot of connection to the world that you and I are living in right now. If you've not been with us in this series, you're kind of coming on a weird week since it's our last week. But we've been working alongside of the Bible Project. And if you've never seen the Bible Project, would highly recommend you take a look at it. They have an app called the Read Scripture app, which we've asked you to take a look at. But why don't we flip over to the Bible Project, and they're going to pick up from the last few chapters here of Daniel and talk a little bit about some of what we learned from the book of Daniel as a whole. So let's watch this video and come back and think through what that means for us.
And he has one final vision. We're shown the same sequence of kingdoms. It's Persia, then Greece, and Alexander the Great, followed by lesser kings, all leading up to this final king of the north, who will invade Jerusalem, set up idols in the temple, and exalt himself above God. But then, all of a sudden, this king comes to ruin. Now, there's been endless debate about what all of these visions refer to. Many see a clear connection to the exploits of the Syrian king Antiochus in the 160s BC. He killed many faithful Jews in Jerusalem and set up idols in the temple. Others think it points forward to the Roman Empire's role in the execution of Jesus and the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70. And still others think it will be fulfilled in future events that have yet to happen when Jesus will return. Now the problem is that the symbols and the numbers, they don't quite match any of these views perfectly. But it opens up the possibility that in a sense they are all right. The book of Daniel has been designed to offer hope to all future generations of God's people. It did so in the days of Antiochus's empire, and it has ever since. This is why Jesus could use imagery from Daniel to describe and confront the oppressive leaders he confronted in Jerusalem. This is why John, the visionary who wrote the Revelation, could adapt Daniel's visions and apply them to Rome of his day and also all future oppressive empires. And so the point of Daniel is that all generations of readers can find here a pattern and a promise. It's a pattern that human beings and their kingdoms become violent beasts when they glorify their own power, when they redefine right and wrong, and don't acknowledge God as their true king. But Daniel also holds out a promise that one day God will confront the beast. He will rescue his world and his people by bringing his kingdom over all nations. And so for every generation, this book speaks a message of hope that should motivate faithfulness. And that's what the book of Daniel is all about.
Man, I love the Bible Project. And hopefully, now that we're wrapping up this book of Daniel, you'll keep using that app to look at other books of the Bible, even maybe some of the themes they talk about. It's an exceptional app, really, really helpful. But here we are at the end of Daniel, and even as that video just showed us, I mean, God is faithful to us, and that God will overcome all the evil powers of this world. And we can be confident in this. We can be encouraged. And Daniel shows us what it is to be faithful in the midst of what are really difficult, trying times. And I just want to take a moment to review some of what we've seen in the life of Daniel, and then apply that to even this passage here, chapters 10 through 12, really some of what's going on in chapter 10. I mean, so let's remember that Daniel, from the first chapter all the way through to the end, is shown to be a disciplined, faithful man. If you remember, he chooses to fast a certain way, to set himself apart from those that surrounded him. And God seemed to honor this somehow. He also is a man who chooses to pray and consistently seek God in prayer when others are sort of distant or far from a life with God or others. Daniel has a way of living into prayer that's continual, and he's courageous. You know, he hits moments of challenge where his faith is challenged, or really even threatening his own life. And he stands strong and faithful. He doesn't even seek to defend himself, and he's brave. I mean, of course, the famous story is of the lion's den, but ways that he comes forward to interpret a dream or speak to power, and yet he's humble in that courage. He isn't like just trying to assert himself. And through all of this disciplined life and courageous life, he's just continually faithful to God. And even in places where he doesn't understand what's going on, he doesn't understand how to interpret a vision, he doesn't understand why he's in the moment he's in, he just is faithful, gets up and does the next thing. And listen, before we think about what these chapters have in mind for us, it's important for us just to note, like, man, what an incredible life. How in the midst of everything being in turmoil, being in exile, not knowing where God is, people around you, your contemporaries, even people, those of you who are following God with you and of your people are going, where is God? We got to get what we need to get. We need to manage the life we need to manage. Daniel stays a man of prayer. He stays faithful to the next thing in front of him. Even when it's confusing, even when it's difficult, he has a disciplined prayer life that takes hold of him every single day. We catch him reading the scriptures. We catch him asking God to do incredible things on behalf of not just him, but on behalf of his people, because it's the way he lives. And I think you and I can live in a world where we imagine, if I had to be thrown in the lion's den, I would stand up to that. Would you? See, because you're not going to be courageous in big moments if you've not been faithful in small ones. That's something we learned from Daniel. And as we get to this chapter 10 that runs us to the end with this last set of visions that, again, are pretty confusing and line up with the other ones, I'm like, well, were those in his time or near his time, or are those yet to be fulfilled? I mean, as the video showed us, there's this interesting thing we see here in chapter 10 that happens where Daniel is doing what he always does, is praying, and God meets him. In chapter 10, verse 2, it says this: "At that time, I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. I ate no choice food, no meat, no wine touched my lips, and I used no lotions at all until the 3 weeks were over." Okay. We've seen this now a few times with Daniel, and I just want to pause and acknowledge it again. This is a man that when things are hard, when things are confusing, he goes to his knees, he goes to his face in prayer, he fasts, he prays, he calls out to God. And what we've seen is that God consistently hears him. As we're finishing this series and thinking about the life of this man, I'd just like you to think about yourself for a second and ask yourself, has this ever been in my life? I mean, have I ever just decided I'm going to fast and I'm going to pray for 3 weeks? Not just for myself, not just for the house I want to buy, not just for the job that I'm confused about, not just that I could get married or that the marriage I have could change, or, that somehow I would have a sense of my own career. Have I ever just said, I care about my church so much. I care about my city so much. I care about my nation so much that I'm going to fast and I'm going to pray and I'm going to call out to God. Because what's amazing about this book is that all of heaven stops and pivots at the prayers of one faithful man. And he's faithful day to day, but then there's key moments like this one where he says, I'm taking 3 weeks and I'm going to fast and I'm going to pray and call out to God on behalf of what he's doing in this nation with his people. Have you ever done that? Has there ever been a window where you do that? And listen, if there hasn't been a window and you're thinking, I probably should try that someday, it might be today. I don't know if you're paying attention in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of a massive racial upheaval. We're going, what is going on in our nation? Racial injustice is being revealed. Tension is taking people right to the streets in protest. If there's ever been a time for God's people to say, let's fast, let's pray as we come to an election, If it's not now, when would it be exactly? Could this be a time that you say, you know what? I'm going to cut out maybe meat and alcohol. Let's try Daniel's. I mean, I don't know what the lotions thing is. I don't get that part, but whatever it is, I know what commentaries say. I'm just saying, why wouldn't we fast and pray right now for our country, for our city, for our churches to stand as a shining light? This is a moment, an opportunity for the Church of Jesus Christ. But we learned something interesting about this fasting and praying with Daniel that shows up in a couple other ways through Daniel, but it's very explicit here. Scan down to verse 10. He says this about this person, this angel that appears in front of him. Okay, so that's what happens before this. But listen to verse 10. It says, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. So this angel shows up, touches him. He falls down on his hands and knees. He said, Daniel, you're highly esteemed. Consider carefully the words I'm about to speak to you, and stand up, for I have now been sent to you. And he said this to me. I stood up trembling. Okay, so an angel comes right to Daniel, says, stand up and listen. I'm about to tell you something. Then he continued, this is verse 12. Then he continued, do not be afraid, Daniel. And here's the key. Since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before God, your words were heard, and I've come in response to them. Okay, remember, it's 3 weeks later. The angel says, the second you started praying, I was sent to you. 3 weeks ago. The second you said, God, I don't understand, and you started to ask, God, give me understanding and do something, I was sent to you. But listen to this. But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me because I was detained there with the king of Persia. Now I've come to explain to you what will happen to your people in the future, for the vision concerns a time yet to come. Okay. This is wild. And we get allusions to this throughout other parts of the Bible, but it's very explicit here that somehow there's demonic forces and powers that reside over places to certain ends. This angel's trying to come to Daniel, but he's resisted by some kind of demon. He's like battling some kind of demonic spirit, such that another angel is sent, the archangel Michael, who's, kind of a big deal. And he comes and fights on behalf of this messenger so that somehow he can slip through and get to Daniel to speak this word. This angel comes. Now, there's so many interesting things about this. One being the thought that this world we live in, which is also backed up by the New Testament, specifically by the Apostle Paul, that talks about the spirit of the air over the earth, that somehow there's demonic forces at work in the world that will even reside over places, trying to inhibit what God is doing, resisting the people of God, resisting even the angels from heaven, and bringing the will of God to earth. And that can be, in our governments, in our families, in our churches. So the first thing we need to realize is there's something that happens in prayer that God is responding to, but that there's dark forces resisting. That's quite a thought. I mean, I know for some of you as you're listening, you're going, this is like trippy, like sci-fi stuff. Well, it's in the Bible. That's what the scriptures say. So, you might want to pay attention to that. And what it also seems to demonstrate to us is that prayer somehow makes it through. It's like, to quote a famous preacher, that prayer is the walkie-talkie on the battlefield of life, where you call in reinforcements. That it's not just all up to you, that you call out to God and God sends help by his Spirit, maybe even with angelic forces and messengers. Now, I don't know what this does to you, but what it does to me is make me realize, wow, prayer is important. It matters that I call out to God, that I need God, that I demonstrate dependency on God. And furthermore, that there are things up against me. I think so many times in our life we're We wake up in the morning, we do our life, and we think, well, why didn't God do this? Or why did God do that? Or where's God in the midst of this? And it's as though we forget there's another team on the field. I don't know if you've played football. I only played football really in the backyard. But, I'd be out in the backyard with my friends, and we're throwing passes and running plays. And, it's all pretty easy until you put another team on the field. And I think so many people that love and follow Jesus are doing their life as though there's not another team on the field. So when things go wrong, they blame God. When things don't happen the way they want them to happen, they blame God. There's another team on the field. There's forces that resist the people of God, the church of God, the message and the hope and the gospel of Jesus Christ. Paul says it really clearly in 1 Corinthians that the God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers. It's like there's some kind of veil. There's a mist that sets over people that don't have life with God, and it's empowered by something evil. Daniel here, and through the course of the entire Bible, the Bible makes an argument that there's another team on the field. And when you know there's another team on the field, you still might run the same plays, but you play different. You expect to get hit. You play harder. You get organized. See, there's some of you that when we say you should pray, it's like, yeah, I should probably pray. I should pray, or, maybe I should just sleep in, or whatever. It's like saying you should eat your broccoli. You should eat your broccoli. Yeah, I know I should probably eat broccoli, but, I don't know. I don't really like broccoli. But what I hope you're hearing is prayer is something different than just like something you should do. Prayer is something that you need. You need a way to be connected to God because you're up against other things. And let me put it more directly. Our nation, our city, your church, my church, the church needs people of prayer, needs people that are disciplined and dependent and ready to respond to the will of God. Your family needs prayer. You need to be connected to God in prayer. You can't act like there's not another team on the field. And just because, here's the second thing we learned, just because your prayers aren't answered instantly doesn't mean they're not heard. Just because your prayers don't just change everything immediately doesn't mean that God isn't moving on your behalf. There's a fight. And the fight, believe it or not, is not in the halls of Washington, D.C. The fight isn't just on Wall Street for what kind of economy we'll have. The fight isn't even in the geopolitical space of nation states against each other. The fight is happening in spiritual realms for the hearts of men and women and for the lives that we live. For whether or not the Church of Jesus Christ will actually have fidelity and connection and hope and love for God, for Jesus himself. That's where the fight is. And Daniel thinks he's praying something about the nation and his people, but suddenly he's given eyes to see a whole nother realm that's also fighting and is resisting the will of God, the people of God. My hope for you is that this gives you faith and hope and courage, and frankly, the right amount of godly fear, reverence for God, and awareness that there are evil forces at work right now, in the midst of all this political stuff we're doing. We don't just wrestle against flesh and blood, says the Apostle Paul, but against principalities and powers. Listen, there's some of you listening to me, you have no life with God. You're like, I don't know, I'm just listening because I'm trying to figure out how to have a life with God. Let me just speak very clearly to you. Because even as I'm speaking now, it's possible that the Holy Spirit is doing battle on behalf of you. As I'm talking right now, you're going, wait a minute, I think this is true. I think there's more going on than meets the eye. How do I get on the right side of this? How do I find a way to be connected to God? And that's been offered in Jesus. Jesus came and he suffered and he died on your behalf. He took all the evil into himself that you and I might be set free. But just because he's won a way for us to have life with God doesn't mean somehow we're rescued from being in the middle of the fight. We're still in the fight now. And actually, strangely, we've joined the rebel army when we give our lives to God. And now there's a target on us. And there's resistance to our lives. Give your life to Jesus. Be set free from the ways that we're so easily enslaved by own desires and buying into the lie that somehow if the right person gets elected, everything's going to be different, because it's not. We're still in the middle of this battle. And one day our King will return and set all things right again. So if you're not following Jesus, and right now you're listening and you're like, this might be true, give your life to him. Now is the right time. But there's many of us who are followers of Jesus, and frankly, we're just lulled back to sleep. We get drawn into the other stories that are political or economic or our own little dramas around our own families and our friendship circles. Heck, we can get emotional about like why the Broncos aren't better, or how did the Nuggets not pull it out in the bubble or whatever, right? I mean, we can get drawn into any other stories that make our emotions move, and we forget like our hearts are really for the King that has come to set us free, Jesus Christ, the one who is fighting on our behalf. Listen, enjoy your Broncos. I like the Nuggets. Okay, so I'm not saying we can't enjoy these things, but let's not get things twisted up. And let's not forget that even this political moment we're in, we're still like in the middle of a fight that's not just political. It's about life with God and those who don't yet know and love and follow Jesus. Don't forget that this racial conversation is fueled by demonic powers and principalities. This is one, not just in tweeting good thoughts or writing interesting articles, but in prayer. So if Daniel does anything for us, if this book does anything, it comforts us that God is with us no matter what else is going on. And furthermore, that prayer matters and that God is fighting on our behalf. And we can call out to him. As we finish this series, may we be people of prayer in whatever is next in this political season. And may this turmoil that we find ourselves in with COVID and all of the protests and the turmoil we find ourselves in the midst of an election season, may it draw us to our faces in prayer and draw us toward one another as God's people, to seek him, to trust him, and know that a day not long from this one, he will come and make all things new again. May the Lord bless you and keep you. It's been an honor to study this book with you.